Um, Hello, my name is Annie and I am addicted to the Enneagram. But seriously. Hello, super friends, and welcome back to another episode of Superhero Saturday, where we talk about the arts of superheroes, storytelling, and so much more. My name is Annie, and today we are continuing a two-part series where I talk about the Enneagram types of different supervillains. As an author of superhero stories and, of course, a longtime fan, I think that using personality typing systems to analyze characters and work on character development is a really easy and honestly super fascinating way to create characters that are more realistic and more fully realized. And my favorite personality type to do this with is the Enneagram system. To get you all caught up on the same page, the Enneagram is a personality typing system that analyzes people's behaviors based on 9 different types and their relationships with themselves and with each other. The Enneagram is my favorite for a few reasons, the first of which, obviously, is that it matches perfectly with my own team of 9 superheroes called the Fearless 9. It's also sufficiently complex and researched that it really is full of different types of data to draw from when you're trying to figure out what this character might do next, but is also simple enough to understand and identify people relatively quickly. Plus, it has this really cool diagram, and y'all know that I am a sucker for good graphics, because if you can use this little tool to find out your personality type, I'm sold. For the other videos in this series, I've used the Enneagram to analyze the different characters in my own team of superheroes, in the superheroes from DC and the Justice League, and for the superheroes from Marvel and the Avengers. I also started last week analyzing different villains, and so I explored all of the different types of DC supervillains that might serve as good examples of different Enneagram types. And that's why we are continuing this week with our Marvel examples of supervillain Enneagram types. And another quick disclaimer, because supervillains are less often used in these different superhero genre stories, the different examples that they have kind of vary a lot. So I'm just basing my analysis on characters that I'm familiar with in different stories. So there might be some examples where it works really well for one type in this one story, but another use of the same character, it has a completely different type. Of course, this is all super subjective science, so if you have a different idea for what a certain character might be typed as, or if you have more examples of these different types, go ahead and leave them down in the comments below. Or pause the video now and give me your guesses for what these different supervillains might be typed as. And now that we've got that out of the way, let's get started with Enneagram typing our Marvel supervillains. We're going to start at the near top of the Enneagram with type 1, which is called the moral perfectionist. Type 1s are completely characterized by their really strong internal sense of righteousness, and they typically have a really harsh inner critic that holds them to the highest standards. I'm a type 1 myself, and I can totally see how people with this type could get sucked into the dark side. This type would produce supervillains who don't believe they're supervillains at all, and in fact, they might even see themselves as a hero. For our Marvel example, I think that Magneto would be the best example of a type 1 supervillain. In his mind, he is fighting the good fight, trying to bring justice to a group of people that has long been ostracized and even oppressed. Even though oftentimes he's not doing stuff that is objectively good guy material, he honestly believes that he is the savior of the mutant race. Our big-hearted type 2 personality type is known as the helper, but don't let that fool you into thinking that they can't be supervillains too. This personality type is really known for their intense love of people. They are dedicated to helping those people in any way that they can, even at the risk of their own lives. This often leads to mild or low-level supervillains because these characters aren't necessarily interested in taking over the world as much as they are interested in doing what they can to help the people they love. I think a good Marvel example of this would be Kingpin. In a few different instances where this supervillain is used, he is most often thinking about the people he loves when he is doing, all that evil stuff that he does. In whatever universe, whether for his wife or his son, he is always looking to protect and set them up, even at the expense of everyone else in the world. Arguably, the most classic supervillain is the Type 3, because as the achievers, their core motivation is to be the best at what they do, no matter what the cost. So that means a supervillain in this type is probably going to want to take over the world. Go figure. They see themselves as the best, and they strive to make that version of themselves real by asserting themselves on the world around them. Type 3s are also known to hide their weaknesses from the world, so another motivation for achiever supervillains might be to cover up the evil they have in their hearts and pretend everything's still okay, even though it's not. For our Marvel example, I have chosen Norman Osborn, aka the Green Goblin. As a businessman, Norman Osborn is pretty much obsessed with his business. However, this ambition tends to come around and bite him in the behind, whether in his personal life or his supervillain life as the Green Goblin. Type 4s are also ripe pickings to become supervillain personality types. They are known as the individualists, and as such, they are extremely self-centered and believe themselves to be so unique that no one else on Earth knows or could understand their pain and suffering that they hold on the inside. A lot of times, supervillains in this type like to be alone with their pain and suffering, and also are basically given over to every whim of their emotional desire. Just remember that if you're creating your own Type 4 supervillain, don't use this as an excuse to fridge their significant other. Killing off a character's loved ones does not mean that they'll automatically become this broody, intense criminal. For our Marvel Type 4 supervillain, I think this is a natural fit for Loki, who is intensely focused on his own aesthetic and believes himself to be more or less the center of the universe, and he'll go to extreme lengths to make that happen. When his emotional trauma is treated more healthfully, he tends to be less of a supervillain and more as a neutral agent of chaos. The Enneagram Type 5 is nicknamed the investigator type because of their deep curiosity. And that's why when you make a supervillain that is a Type 5, they often fall into the evil genius trope. And the list for this type of supervillain gets longer every day, but it is a classic for a reason. Type 5s are so devoted to the pursuit of knowledge in whatever field they're interested in that they will forsake everything else for the pursuit of this new information. They tend to forget that anyone else exists, and sometimes even forget that their own bodies exist, because everything is just focused on the data and the information that they strive to understand. So accidentally slipping into the dark side isn't unheard of. I think a good example in the Marvel Universe of a Type 5 supervillain is Doc Ock, who is really just devoted to the study of his own science. In this way, it kind of makes him into the classic evil genius, because while he is really an expert in his science, he's not really an expert in anything else. And it makes it fairly easy for superheroes like Spider-Man, who's really just a 15-year-old kid in some iterations, to take him down. Our next Enneagram type is the Type 6, which is known as the Loyalists. This makes for really interesting supervillains, because even though they're most often seen as the doting sidekick to a bigger bad guy, Type 6 supervillains are actually particularly hardcore. They are the ones who will follow a misleading cause all the way to the end and never betray it, even if they have a little bit of reservation, because they cannot see themselves breaking from that tradition. They are also really personable, very charismatic. As far as supervillains go, that makes them particularly powerful because they often are able to recruit people to join their side with relative ease. I think the best example of this is the Vulture from Spider-Man Homecoming. It doesn't take him long at all to see himself as him against the man, and as soon as he shares that with his fellow co-workers, they are right on board because that Type 6 really shines and makes them gravitate toward his energy. Enneagram Type 7s are known as the enthusiasts, but for our characterization of supervillains, I really want to call them the agents of chaos. Type 7s are mainly motivated by the search for another good time, and they seek out this experience in whatever fashion it might present itself. I think that the best Marvel example for this is Venom. Venom isn't really interested in taking over the world. He isn't really interested in doing anything outside of just living his life. eating whatever he wants, sleeping whenever he wants. As long as he's having fun, he doesn't care what his host does. Our next type is probably the most obvious supervillain personality type, as they are known as the challengers. Type 8s are generally the most aggressive and assertive of the Enneagram typing system, and they go all out for whatever they choose to do, and no one can stand in their way. I think the absolute best example of this is actually Hela from Thor Ragnarok. She is a force of nature, and she wants to have free reign to do whatever she wishes, especially if she wishes for death and destruction everywhere. There is nothing that can stop her, and if you ever want to go toe-to-toe with her, she is down to give you a fight. And after that intensity of Type 8, we end on Type 9, which is known as the Peacekeeper. Again, don't let the name fool you, because this is not an unusual place for a supervillain to land personality-wise. Type 9s prefer to stay in their comfort zone, and they'll do basically whatever it takes if it means that they get to be left alone in peace. This makes them really easy to become low-level supervillains who aren't so interested in taking over the world as they are in creating their own little hidey spot to just be and rest. This often tends to be the supervillain type for criminals that are really interested in just sticking with their one theme. I know this might sound like a weird example, but I think that our Type 9 Marvel supervillain is Thanos. He really just wants a nice quiet place to lay his head, and he wants to get that peace all across the universe, which is what drives him to really do the snap and then haul off to his quiet little lakeside cabin. It's also an interesting twist because Type 9s often don't believe that they deserve any recognition on the inside, and according to some of this character's lore, he wants the power to make the world his comfort zone, but also doesn't believe he deserves it. This turbulent and controversial sense of self-worth and the continuous search for peace through power makes himself a Type 9 supervillain, in my opinion. So there you have it, one giant list of all of the Enneagram supervillain types and their Marvel Universe equivalents. Do you think that I missed any characters that would be really good examples of some of these different types? Or do you have arguments for why one character might be a different type than what I just characterized them? Go ahead and put those down in the comments below and join in the conversation. Thanks so much for watching, Super Friends. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give us a big thumbs up and subscribe to our channel if you want to see more superheroic or super villainous content every single Saturday. You can join the team by following us on social media or supporting us over on Patreon. And if you want to see my own superheroic characters in action, including some supervillains, go to our website at www.fearless9.com, where you can pick up a copy of a book that might contain your new favorite supervillain or superhero. Thanks again for watching, Super Friends, and we'll see you next week.